Hey everybody, my name is Nate Huck. I'm the Waterfowl Program Specialist for PGC, and we're here today to talk to you at our annual waterfowl briefing.
And I'm Gregg, Chief of the Wildlife Operations Division in the Bureau of Wildlife Management. Welcome everyone to this Facebook Live event. We'll be spending a lot of the time this afternoon talking about the proposed waterfowl hunting seasons for the 2022-23 hunting season. But obviously there's a lot more than just setting seasons to the Game Commission's waterfowl management program, law enforcement, information and education, and of course habitat is a very key focus. So we'd actually like to begin today by showing a video that highlights some of the great habitat work for waterfowl that our Game Commission regions are doing.
My name's Darren Clark. I'm the Land Management Group Supervisor up in Group 5 in Erie and Crawford County in Northwest Region. We're here today to talk about the Marshmaster. It's a piece of equipment we purchased a couple years ago. It's a fully amphibious tracked vehicle. It allows us to get in access to areas, aquatic areas, wet areas that we typically couldn't get before with any other piece of machinery. It comes with a variety of different implements attached to the back, similar to a three-point hitch on a tractor. Some of the work we've been able to do is get into some areas and use the backhoe to remove beaver debris. We have a heavy beaver population on this game lands and the game lands up in this area, and they continuously plug our control structures, which prevent us from manipulating water levels to increase the habitat for waterfowl. So by using the backhoe, we've been able to get those control devices opened back up. That in conjunction with some increasing the opportunity for trapping and reducing a beaver population we've made great strides in our water manipulation. We also have a roller chopper, which we've been working today. And what that is it's basically a big drum with blades on it that we drag behind air and knock down cattails. This main dam has a large area that's just solid, massive cattails, which is basically unusable. The waterfowl won't land in there because it's so thick of cattails. By going in and rolling it, it knocks it down, chops it up, and opens that area back up for the waterfowl to get in there. In addition, we can also come back in and flood that area, and by putting those knockdown cattails underneath water, it will control and thin out, even kill some of that cattail. We also use it for invasive control. We have some purple loosestrife, which is a non-native invasive that will take over an area. So we kind of stay on top of that for spraying, and by using the Marshmaster, just be able to drive out through these very wet areas. We can get in there and spray the herbicide and keep the invasives such as purple loosestrife and Phragmites under control. It also has a set of discs, just the same as you would use behind a tractor, and we'll use those in the springtime. Once we draw down an impoundment, we can go in and disc that just like you would disc a field. That disturbs the soil, it'll disturb the seed bank and promote growth of desirable moist soil plants such as some sedges, rushes, and smartweed.
Hi, I'm Lauren Frary, and I'm the Controlled Hunts Manager here at Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area. All of the habitat that you're getting to see today at Middle Creek is for waterfowl, but also for opportunities for our waterfowl hunters as well. In addition to the management that we do here for waterfowl, we also provide a permitted opportunity for waterfowl hunting. Basically what that means is that you can apply to come and hunt at Middle Creek in one of our blinds. We have different blinds on the property. Some are above ground duck blinds, like our habitat crew is building, actually has just built yesterday, that will brush in camouflage. And then we also have pit blinds for both ducks and for geese opportunities. We run 8 different duck blinds, which is actually an increase from last year from 6, because it's a very popular opportunity. And we also run 15 goose blinds every year as well. You can apply for the application to hunt at Middle Creek in September through the Huntfish PA website, or you can go onto Middle Creek's website during the hunting season and actually apply for a blind 1 week ahead of time. In addition to all the management and the blinds here, we hope that you're able to enjoy Middle Creek at some point throughout the year.
Hi, I'm Steve Ferrari, land manager covering Lancaster and Chester counties in the southeast region, and more specifically Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area. So we're going to just do a short overview of waterfowl impoundment management that we've been implementing on the property over the past couple of years here. Some of these areas kind of used to sit as ponds at full pool all the time, and recently we've been really fluctuating those water levels and timing it properly to grow all kinds of awesome duck food. So we're at one of our impoundments here now. This one actually has a waterfowl hunting blind on it. We're up to full pool now. It's November 3rd, but if you can imagine, back in April, May, June, and July through the growing season, this would have been all exposed mud with new plants starting to germinate and grow. Here we are now. Most of these plants have senesced or gone dormant for the season, but what they've left us and what they've left behind is a bunch of awesome duck food. So down in here, we have smartweeds. Most people are familiar with a lot of smartweeds. We have Bidens or beggar's ticks. This thing will give out all kinds of awesome duck seed that they'll love to come through here and eat. Down in the water a little bit further, we'll pull out things like spike rush. There's all kinds of sedges. There's some watercress. Just all kinds of awesome plant food that the ducks will come in here and eat on. So here at Middle Creek, we have numerous water control structures that allow us to fluctuate the water levels throughout the year. Most of these structures were installed in the 1970s, and they're starting to show some age. A lot of them are going to be replaced here in the coming years. What we have here is one of the original structures. Pretty basic, pretty simple, concrete with wooden boards. Each time we pull a wooden board, we can release water, drawing down the water levels. We can put the board back in to raise the water levels. Seems simple, but the most important thing is the timing throughout the year of when we do these drawdowns and reflooding. We want to slowly draw these impoundments down to grow native vegetation and show multiple generations throughout the growing season. We time that with migration events of not only waterfowl, but also shorebirds. And we make sure that these impoundments are back up to full pool come fall migration, so ducks can stop over, grab a bite to eat, and continue their migration south. So we've been working with Ducks Unlimited biologists, surveyors, and engineers on various projects at Middle Creek. This example here is one of the structures we've recently replaced. This design's a little bit different than what you previously saw, where water simply flows over those wooden boards. Here, this structure has an inflow pipe and an outflow pipe. What this allows us to do is capture and keep all of that floating seed, all that floating duck food, and keep that in the impoundment. This pulls water down low in the impoundment. Water comes in, has to flow over the series of boards, and then out the other side. All right, now that you've seen the maintenance side of replacing structures, now we're standing at a future site of a new waterfowl impoundment. This project will be, once again, a cooperative project with Ducks Unlimited. Our PGC staff will actually be doing the work on the ground. This will be roughly 5 acres in size and will hopefully be an awesome project.
We're here at Shohola Marsh Reservoir Lake. It's a 1,000-acre lake. We've been managing milfoil here for the last 3 years, since 2019. With the initial application, there was 4 phases of the management of the water body. The focus of the program was to take the milfoil population, broadleaf milfoil, which was a monoculture, which inundated approximately 800 acres of the lake. So a significant amount of lake was covered in milfoil. We're trying to reintroduce the natives and give them some habitat to breathe and to grow so that the waterfowl and management program here can flourish without the milfoil being present in such dominant species. Over the last 3 years, since 19, we've seen a decrease in the milfoil population down to just sprigs that we're starting to see now here and there reoccur. Other areas have no milfoil. The majority of the lake, you have to really try to search it out and try to find some of that milfoil. The northern portion of the water body, or the upper inflow area of the water body, the main inflow stream is great habitat for waterfowl as well as the entire lake, but they're managing that area pretty specifically to reintroduce those natives. That's a native pondweed. That's a native bladderwort. You can see the tiny bladders So this plant was trying to survive amongst the milfoil. It's getting choked out. Now we're starting to see a lot more of that native plant. Anybody looking to hunt, tried to get out on that water, they could not because of the density of plants out there. Now people are enjoying themselves. There's fishing. There's probably about 5 fishermen out there right now. We've closed the ramp today. There's usually about 25, 30 trucks just in this zone.
So that's really great to see all that habitat work going on across the state. I'd just like to highlight that over the next 3 years, PGC is actually committed to spend $6 million on wetland infrastructure statewide. And so we're really looking forward to seeing how those dollars get spent and seeing waterfowl habitat put on the ground.
On that same note, I'd like to put in a plug for this coming Saturday, March 12th at 12 noon. We'll have an open house at the Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area. We'll be presenting a lot of the same information that we are today about seasons and biology, but there will also be an opportunity to actually look at some of the Middle Creek habitat work. So invite anyone who's available this Saturday to come to Middle Creek for that. With that, we'll shift gears and start talking a little bit more about the 2022-2023 hunting seasons. And to begin, just with a little bit of an overview, it's important to remember that waterfowl and other migratory game birds are ultimately under federal authority by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so they're different from species like deer or turkeys that we can basically set regulations for in Pennsylvania without any reference to any other jurisdictions. The Fish and Wildlife Service is the agency that ultimately sets regulations for waterfowl and migratory game birds, but the states do have a role in making suggestions into that process through the Flyway Council system. And so actually, the process for setting the hunting regulations for 2022-23 began all the way back a year ago in March of 2021 with the Winter Flyway meetings. There were additional meetings in August and September of last year where the Flyway states get together, discuss issues, and make recommendations to the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Fish and Wildlife Service then takes those recommendations along with other biological and social data, and then they put out what is called frameworks for the states to select their seasons. What those frameworks do is basically give the sideboards that we have to work within. So they tell us, for example, the maximum number of hunting days we can have for a particular species, the maximum daily bag limits, the earliest opening date, the latest closing date we can have, and how many segments and splits we can have for each season. Those were published last month for the 2022-23 seasons, and so now we're at the stage of the process where we in Pennsylvania make our selections within those frameworks. And there are a couple ways that we get information from our hunters to know what they would like to see our selections be. One of those is that for a couple weeks now, some proposed 2022-23 seasons have been out on the website, and so we've been getting comments back on those proposals. We'll also expect to get comments, obviously, during this live event today, as well as the event I mentioned at Middle Creek on Saturday. And we'll certainly take all of those into consideration. Also really important, in addition to those comments that we get each year, we did a major waterfowl hunter survey a couple years ago where we were able to actually ask a few thousand waterfowl hunters what their opinions were and what they would like to see in terms of season selections. So at this point, I'll ask Nate to take a few minutes to talk about some of the highlights of that survey and how they may play into this year's season selections.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So for our waterfowl hunter survey, as Ian mentioned, we received responses from a little over 800 of our waterfowl hunters. In general, the majority of our waterfowl hunters we found to be pretty satisfied with our waterfowl seasons as they are currently. I think about 59% or so of them were satisfied. Generally speaking, maybe South Zone might have had a little bit less satisfaction overall with those seasons, but still the majority of hunters were either satisfied or had no general preference on those seasons. And then in addition to that satisfaction, we did see dissatisfaction range from about like 10% in the Northwest Zone to maybe 21% in the South Zone. So again, only 21% of people were dissatisfied with those seasons. And that's why, generally speaking, we haven't seen a major shift in our proposed seasons since that survey because, as I said, the majority of people were mostly satisfied. Another couple of interesting things, in every zone, Thanksgiving and New Year's Day were in the top 2 to 3 holidays that people wanted to see open. So that really drives a lot of the way that we're setting our seasons, just making sure that both of those days are open. For goose seasons, satisfaction with dates for AP was 41%, with about 31% were dissatisfied. It's hard to know because I didn't ask, but I would guess a lot of that dissatisfaction actually is a result of the shorter seasons that we're seeing over there, which we'll get into in a little bit. In the RP goose zone, 59% were satisfied and 9% were dissatisfied. So 46% of people also said we needed to do a better job of soliciting input on seasons. And that's a big reason why we're here today and why we started this last year. And in addition to that, 76% of people said they would view this as a live stream or as a recorded. So hopefully we're reaching a lot of you, and hopefully if you're not seeing this live, you're seeing it afterward. And please remember to submit your comments. Or at this point in time, we have about 93 comments on our seasons, so we'd love to hear from more of you.
We will point out too that we want to hear from you if you like the proposed season selections, as well as if there's something you dislike. We don't want to just hear from dissatisfied hunters that want us to change something and then end up changing something that people actually like. So if something looks good to you, or if all of the proposed seasons look good, please let us know that as well, just as much as if there's something you're dissatisfied with. So with that, that's a little bit of an overview of the process, how we got here, and how we make those selections each year. Before we jump into some of the comments from the live feed, there's several issues that constantly come up as we're talking to hunters, or that have already come in through some of the comments on the proposed seasons. And we'll begin by talking about some of those issues specifically. So Nate and I will kind of alternate covering those questions here, and Nate will take the first one.
Yeah. So the first question, and probably one of our most prevalent ones, is if frameworks allow for duck seasons to end on January 31st, why are we not proposing the South Zone, the North Zone, or the Northwest Zone, or even Lake Erie Zone to close on January 31st? And so first and foremost, I'd like to discuss a little bit of some of the research that we've seen. We have some general concerns about breaking pair bonds late in the year. And what this means is in November and December, most of our mallards have established pairs. And it's a regular part of a duck's life to kind of break those pair bonds and have to reestablish pair bonds. But that kind of slows down throughout fall. Obviously, because of hunting and other disturbances, they may break their pair bonds, whether a drake is shot or just simply through disturbance. And that takes a lot of then energy for that female to go out, especially the later in the year that it is, to then go out and develop a new pair bond. And that energy, especially that time of year in February, can be really important for that bird. And so that's might result in decreased productivity and decreased egg laying. So that's kind of one of the major things. In addition, as I mentioned, Thanksgiving and New Year's Day are two of the most important holidays to be open. And when you look at the total 60 days that we get, and you start parsing things out and realize how far that actually gets you, it can be really difficult to set a season that's open for both of those days and then extends into the end of January. And so our proposal right now, going forward, is to continue to have the Saturday closest to January 19th to be the last day for the South Zone duck season. And so for this year, that means January 22nd.
Another species that we really get a lot of questions on is Canada geese, and very specifically in southeastern Pennsylvania for our Atlantic population, or AP zone for short. Why does the AP zone have a one bird daily bag limit? There are geese everywhere. The short answer to that is, I mentioned earlier the federal frameworks, and that one bird daily bag limit within that season is a restriction within the federal frameworks. We can be more restrictive than the frameworks if we want to, but we cannot be more liberal. So if the Fish and Wildlife Service says the bag limit's 1, we can make it 0, but we can't make it 2. But for a little more background on why that limit is so restrictive, there really is some biology behind it. And it's really based on the difference between resident population Canada geese and migrant Atlantic population Canada geese. There's no question that there are an awful lot of Canada geese in southeastern Pennsylvania, and most of those are resident population geese that nest there in the spring and that are there all year round. During the fall and winter months, however, we do have migrant geese, the Atlantic population, or AP. Those birds actually nest in far northern Quebec, and then they migrate through the northeastern United States and spend the winter basically between southeastern Pennsylvania through the Chesapeake Bay and into eastern North Carolina. The big biological difference between RP and AP geese is in productivity. Resident population geese both basically have good gosling production every year. They're nesting in April and May and June, and weather is nice and warm. That's not always the case in northern Quebec. There can be a foot of snow on the ground the first week of June, and so some years, in fact in 2018, there were virtually no goslings produced on the migrants' breeding grounds. And for the last 10 years, there's only been a couple years where productivity's been average or above. And as you might expect, when you add hunting to that equation, that has resulted in a decreased population that we've seen in surveys. And as a result, even though very much of the geese that are present in southeastern Pennsylvania during fall and winter are resident population geese, there's enough of an influence on AP geese through harvest that AP geese are really what needs to drive the regulations for that part of the state. We have had a very conservative AP zone season for 3 years now in the U.S. 22-23 will be the 4th year. We think that based on what we know from productivity and survival rates, that the harvest rates that we're currently experiencing with this conservative season should be enough that the population has hopefully turned the corner and started to increase. But that brings in another complication, which is, like a lot of other things in life, COVID-19 has impacted goose management because there's been no opportunity to do a population survey or banding on the Atlantic population breeding grounds for the past 2 years. So we're really not completely sure at this point what's going on with that population. We're cautiously optimistic that that monitoring work will be able to resume in 2022. We'll see what it shows us. If it fits in with what the population models are telling us, then hopefully we wouldn't be too far away from being able to relax those restrictions somewhat. I'll also mention that we have a major research project that we're looking to get underway. The Atlantic flyway states that winter AP geese have contributed about $600,000 to a project that'll put satellite transmitters on AP geese. And what that'll do is improve the data that we have, in addition to the band recovery data that we have a lot of, to give us a look at what the migration routes and patterns of those birds are. And that'll in turn allow us to be really surgical in terms of carving out areas where we have to be very conservative in these areas and at these times because of the presence of AP geese, and find other areas and times where AP geese aren't present and we can be more liberal and allow more hunting opportunities. So that's the rationale behind that restrictive bag limit in the AP zone.
Thanks, Ian. So another question that we get pretty frequently is, why is the mallard bag limit 2? They're our most plentiful duck. And this one, is really been similar to the AP goose issue. We've seen 36% decline in eastern mallard populations over the last 20 years. And there's been some recent research that suggested that maybe there's really limited reproduction in Northeast US that's kind of been driving that decline. And one of the things that I'd really like to bring up as part of that is we've just started a new mallard research project. Myself, Josh Stiller with New York Department of Environmental Conservation, John Calusi with Ducks Unlimited, Mitch Wiegman with University of Saskatchewan, Jake Straub with SUNY Brockport, and Marie Rasiopa is the PhD student who'll be working on that at University of Saskatchewan. We're going to be deploying over 1,000 transmitters on female black ducks across the Atlantic Flyway states with our 22 partners, both federal, state, and NGO partners. And so we're really looking forward to hopefully having that help to inform this decline, what are our survival rates, what does nest success look like, and things like that, and really trying to help improve our understanding of eastern mallards and figure out where things are. In addition to that, we just implemented a new population model, and as that gets, hopefully, once that's approved, we're going to start looking to see if there is additional harvest opportunity or if there isn't.
Nate's lucky that he's a species biologist that actually gets out in the field and catches mallards and puts transmitters on them. We're talking about actually sending him up to the AP breeding grounds in the next couple of years to go back to put on some of those transmitters. So I guess that's the disadvantage of taking a promotion, is all I get to do is look at the maps of the transmitters. But there is a lot of really cool research going on in the flyway these days. One of the other questions that we get pretty commonly about waterfowl seasons: why are there no Sundays proposed for waterfowl hunting seasons? I think most people are aware that there was a pretty big change that the legislature made 2 years ago, where they authorized the Game Commission to open 3 Sundays to big game hunting in 2020. Then in 2021, for species like squirrels and pheasants that have season dates that overlap with those 3 Sundays, those species were also opened to hunting on those 3 Sundays. So it's a pretty logical question: if you can hunt all these other species on Sundays, why don't you open up waterfowl hunting on those days? And the answer, which is going to sound really strange when I first say it, is that if we opened those Sundays, we'd actually lose hunting opportunity, and I'll try to explain a little bit why that is. Pennsylvania is one of a few states that have Sundays closed to migratory game bird hunting under state law, and because of that, there's a provision that the Fish and Wildlife Service provides to Pennsylvania and those other states called compensatory days. Basically what that means is, when you count up the number of days in a particular migratory game bird season, whether it's 30 days for AP goose season, 60 days for a duck season, 90 days for mourning dove seasons, or whatever, the Sundays within those calendar dates don't count against you as hunting days because they're closed by state law. That way we have an equal number of hunting days as other states that have all of their Sundays open. The catch to that is it's an all or nothing thing. So if you have Sundays open to any migratory game bird hunting, you lose all your compensatory days. And that's where the trade-off would come in. So because of the fact that we're limited to just those 3 Sundays by what the legislature authorized the Game Commission to do, we could indeed open those 3 Sundays to waterfowl and other migratory game bird hunting, but we would lose all of our compensatory days, which would mean all of the other Sundays within the season dates would now count against us as if they were hunting days, even though they'll still be closed by state regulation. So for example, with a 60-day duck season, we could add those 3 Sundays, but we'd lose about 7 compensatory Sundays, and so our net hunting opportunity would go from 60 days to 53 or 54 days, depending on exactly how you count it. So if and when the legislature gives the Game Commission the authority to open all Sundays to hunting, that would be a good time to revisit this question, because we could add all Sundays within the season without subtracting from our total number of days. But unless and until that happens, we can actually provide more hunting opportunity by keeping all Sundays closed and maintaining those compensatory days to get the full number of hunting days within each season.
Another question that we get pretty frequently is, why isn't duck season split during the deer season? And so kind of going back to that discussion of federal frameworks, under our current zones and splits framework, where we have 4 zones, we've actually been grandfathered in to allow 1 split in each of those zones. So when we open the season up in October and then have a split, as we call it, in the season, we're only allowed to have 1 of those during that duck season. And so we couldn't then open it up for part of November and then close it again during early December for the deer season. So it's it's kind of this complicated route that we go through of trying to satisfy as many people as we possibly can. We know that like 40% of our duck hunters would like to see the season split during duck season, but we also know another 40% don't want to see any splits in their duck season, and then another 20% want to see the season split at some other point in time. To be able to go to 2 splits and have that split in October that we're kind of used to, and then also a split during deer season, we would have to cut our zones down to 2. So we would have to make some sacrifices to be able to get that.
Yeah, it definitely makes it complicated. There are some things we don't have the ability to change because they're within the federal frameworks, but even these things like where we place dates and splits and so forth gets really complicated because different hunters want different things, and we recognize we're never going to be able to please everybody. But again, we'd like to get comments from folks whether they like the proposals or dislike them. One final question that we'll cover before we get into the ones that are coming through the Facebook feed is why can't we use unplugged shotguns during the conservation order for light geese? Just a little bit of background on that. Probably most people are aware that snow and Ross's geese are generally considered overabundant across North America. And so to address that and allow higher harvest rates, the Fish and Wildlife Service has allowed some things that they typically don't allow for migratory game bird hunting. Electronic calls are one of those, hunting until 1/2 hour after sunset is another, and then unplugged shotguns, which for those who aren't familiar just means that you don't have the normal limitation of only 3 shells in the chamber and the magazine combined. For the light goose conservation order, that rule is not in place, at least at the federal level. About 15 years ago, when the Atlantic Flyway first began its light goose conservation order, the Board of Commissioners for Pennsylvania went ahead and made 2 of those changes. We allowed electronic calls and hunting until 1/2 hour after sunset in the Game Commission's regulations during the light goose conservation order. Back at that time, there were some concerns from staff about whether the unplugged shotgun option was really something we wanted to do, and so we really didn't spend a lot of time looking into it. More recently, as hunter interest has continued, we certainly get this question quite a bit, and it seems like the concerns that staff had early on have minimized somewhat. We actually started looking into this in a little more detail, and at this time last year, we actually started putting together a summary paper to start working through the regulations process to potentially make that change. What we found out, though, as we started through that process was that under Title 34, which is sort of the umbrella state law that only the legislature can change, under which the Game Commission sets its regulations, there are a couple exceptions already built into Title 34 that allowed the Game Commission to make those changes that we did early on during the conservation order, so the electronic calls and hunting after sunset. However, as we looked at it more closely, there actually is no exception written into Title 34 that would allow the Game Commission to make that change to allow unplugged shotguns for the conservation order. So similar to that Sunday hunting question that we talked about earlier, the best thing that we can say as the Game Commission is to contact your state representative, your state senator, and let them know about your concerns. If there's a change made to Title 34 that would allow us to make that regulatory change, we can take a look at that point. At this point, I think we're shifting over to questions that are coming in from the live feed, and again, Nate and I will kind of alternate here. Hopefully he's had a chance to read the first one and think about the answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually kind of lump these first 2 in together. So we got a question from Steve that says, I would like to see more work on the Susquehanna River to enhance waterfowl habitat. Are there any projects planned or currently happening to do so? And then we also got a question from Daniel asking, what specifically are you doing at Pymatuning Wildlife Management Area? And so I think both of these kind of feed back into that discussion of that $6 million commitment from the Game Commission. And currently we're in the process of ranking projects statewide so that we can figure out where exactly we're going to spend that money. Obviously it's a lot of money, and we want to make sure that we've prioritized it for to do what's best for all wildlife, not just waterfowl. And so right now, I guess I can't comment specifically on either of those on what's currently happening, but I can say that we're in the process of creating those rankings, and in the future we should be able to let people know where we're planning to spend that money.
Matthew asks, are there any programs that private Pennsylvania citizens can assist with hatching of waterfowl eggs? I guess the short answer is not really, at least in terms of wild birds. Similar to some of the hunting regulations, there are some pretty strict federal regulations in terms of what you can do with nests and eggs of migratory birds, as well as actually hunting or otherwise impacting adult birds. I will say, though, that doesn't mean there isn't anything you can do as a private citizen to benefit waterfowl reproduction. Wood duck nest boxes are probably the most obvious example. They hatch thousands of birds across Pennsylvania each year. The Game Commission has a lot of resources both to purchase pre-made waterfowl nesting boxes, as well as plans and woodworking kits that you can build your own box and then put them up. There are better and worse places that those boxes can be put up, and it's important to have a predator guard to make sure that you're not creating a trap situation for the hen that might nest there. But there's very good opportunities in much of the state through wood duck nest boxes to benefit production. Also, mallard nest cylinders are something that we don't do probably quite as commonly as wood duck boxes, but in certain situations, a wire cylinder that sort of has hay wrapped in it can be really attractive to mallard hens that are getting ready to nest. And again, if you have a predator guard and good habitat, can benefit local waterfowl production. So both with those specific nesting structures, as well as just keeping good nesting cover and quality wetland habitat, is something that individual citizens can do to really benefit waterfowl populations.
So our next question is from Tricia, and she asks what the Game Commission's stance on feeding Canada geese in areas that are attempting to deter geese with scudding. I guess I'm not familiar with the scudding term, but generally speaking, if you have issues with people or your neighbors feeding Canada geese, I would encourage you to contact your local municipalities. They're going to have more ability to kind of impact those ordinances and things like that.
That definitely is a factor to consider, that when you're trying to reduce nuisance goose issues, feeding or eliminating feeding is really one of the important things to do. Next question, Chris asks, how are the hours set for waterfowl hunting seasons? And this is basically gets back to the frameworks again. It's a pretty well cut and dried that for most waterfowl seasons, hunting hours are 1/2 hour before sunrise until sunset. And that applies to there may be something I'm not thinking of, but almost all species, except for with a couple exceptions. One of those is during the September Canada goose season. We're allowed to have hunting hours extend from 1/2 hour before sunrise to 1/2 hour after sunset, and then that same parameters for the late goose conservation order. Basically, it's pretty consistent, though. You can be assured that the starting time for waterfowl and migratory game bird seasons is always going to be the same as it is for resident species like deer and turkeys. 1/2 hour before sunrise is really consistent. Most of the time, though, for the closing hours, that's going to be different between waterfowl and the resident species. It'll be 1/2 hour earlier for waterfowl. I would recommend that you consult your digest of hunting and trapping regulations. That has tables right in it that for both the resident species, deer and turkey and so forth, and for migratory game birds. Make sure you consult that migratory game birds hunting hours table. That'll give you for each week during the season, with the appropriate adjustment for how far west you're located in Pennsylvania, when you can start and finish hunting for the day.
Our next question comes from BJ, and he asks how many hunters were contacted for the waterfowl surveys. And for our most recent waterfowl hunter survey, we reached out to, I think it was 2,000 people. So we have 80 to 88,000 migratory game bird stamp purchasers. And so we reached out to a random subset of about 2,000 of those people. And we received a little over 800 responses from active waterfowl hunters on that. And we actually know, using some using statistics that it only takes roughly 200 responses to be able to have a statistically valid sample. So.
I think there was a question about number of waterfowl hunters and how that impacts the number of geese. I'm going to pass that one to Nate because I think he's probably more recently looked at the exact trends in both our hunter numbers and harvest and how those may play out for geese specifically. So I'll leave that question for him, but I'll take the next one from Ron, who asks if the same goose population is coming down through New York, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, why are all the limits different? That's a really complicated question, and it's partly correct and partly not. Actually, during the regular season right now, where we're in a restrictive package, the limits aren't different. It's a 30-day season with a one bird bag limit for the regular season in all three of those states, as well as states to the north and south of there. That's basically just in recognition that when the population is in not so good condition as it is right now, that sort of all the states share the pain in that, just equalizes numbers between the different states. Now, if and when, and hopefully this happens before too long, we get into what's called a moderate or a standard or liberal package, there we do get into some differences both in season length and bag limit between the individual states. And that's really based on the percentages of the total number of geese in an area that's made up of migrant AP geese. Sort of the highest concentrations are always right around the Chesapeake Bay, Eastern Shore of Maryland, Eastern Virginia, Delaware, those parts of the Mid-Atlantic. For Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, we're kind of in the middle, so we don't have as high of a percentage of migrant geese in our total goose numbers as the Chesapeake region does, but we have more than the states to our north. So for example, the New England states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire, they have very few AP geese throughout the season. And so as we get into situations where the Atlantic population recovers and there's more hunting opportunity on that population, the opportunities will actually expand faster in Pennsylvania and even faster than that in New England because of that differential impact that the different states have on the AP resource, and again to allow opportunity for resident population geese.
So as Ian said, he kicked the question about dwindling hunter numbers and their impacts on geese over to me. And so as part of that, within Pennsylvania, we haven't generally seen a huge decline, especially in goose hunters. We're still one of the top, if not the top, goose harvest state in the Atlantic Flyway. So in terms of RP geese, we do a fair job of harvesting those birds. During our early seasons, just in September alone, we see 20 to 30,000 Canada geese harvested in the state. And so generally speaking, our goose populations have stabilized statewide. We see a few hot spots, like particularly in the southeast, where our regular seasons are kind of limited. And like Ian had mentioned, we're kind of exploring where we might be able to find additional opportunity to harvest those birds. Yeah, beyond that, we don't have, like I said, we aren't really seeing this dwindling hunter numbers, especially as it pertains to goose hunters. We've seen pretty static goose hunter numbers.
It will be interesting to see in the next few years as we look at our population estimates if we do see a little bit of an uptick in southeastern Pennsylvania. If you look back at the numbers in the 1990s, if you've been hunting waterfowl long enough, you remember we actually had a closed regular season because the AP was really in bad shape at that time. And if you look at the numbers of resident population geese, just because of those hunting limitations through the 90s, they just really skyrocketed. As Nate said, then they did level off as the AP recovered and we were able to expand those hunting opportunities. So there really is a lot of give and take that both affects and shows up in the later population numbers. Jonathan asks, can volunteers help manage Game Commission property in the Susquehanna River, perhaps specific to Haldeman Island? And also, if the Game Commission would sell the property as an agreement, will it go to waterfowl conservation? In terms of the volunteer programs, I think I'll have to defer that question to the South Central region, which manages Haldeman Island. In terms of the habitat management activities, you could contact the regional office in Huntington and mention maybe what your interest and abilities are, and if and how that might fit into assisting the Game Commission with management. As far as I know, there's no intentions of selling Haldeman Island. That's a very valuable location for both waterfowl habitat and waterfowl research that the agency has held for several decades now. And it's really one of the crown jewels, I think, of the state game land system. So I really don't foresee us selling that. And I will just say that in terms of revenues that we get from different sources, we tend not to earmark them too much. Another question, we didn't cover it in our canned question, so to speak, but sometimes hunters ask, why don't we have a mandatory state level duck stamp that you could earmark those proceeds for waterfowl habitat management. Typically in the Game Commission, we don't do that too much. Same thing with the pheasant permit that we initiated a few years ago. Those revenues just go into the general agency budget and allow us to direct funds where they're needed for different game and non-game species. So typically if there's income that's in some way related to waterfowl, that doesn't automatically mean it's going to go directly back to waterfowl. But by the same token, money that we do spend on waterfowl habitat and waterfowl management doesn't necessarily have to come specifically from waterfowl hunters. So we try to maintain that flexibility in our budget to cover all these different species that we're in charge of managing.
The next question we have is from Alex, and he asks how we get goose harvest numbers. And so that kind of just depends. So recently we started a September goose harvest survey. So we reach out again to a random sample of those who have purchased the migratory game bird permit by the end of September, and ask them about their harvest and where and how many days that they participated in that hunt. And then we also have the HIP. So when you sign up or when you purchase a hunting license, you frequently will get asked, hopefully you get asked questions about your migratory bird hunting activities the last year. And through a random sample of those people will get included into the HIP harvest survey. And if you participate for 3 years, basically they'll just ask you how many ducks and geese did you harvest in a day and how many days did you hunt. If you participate in that for 3 years, then you'll actually be included in what we call the wing survey, and where you'll be asked to provide a wing from every duck you harvest, or the tail feathers and the wing tips from every goose you harvest. And we can use that to identify species composition of those, kind of that estimate. So if we ask you how many geese are harvested, and then 90% of the geese harvested from Pennsylvania are Canada geese, we know that roughly 90% of that total harvest estimate is Canada geese. So that's kind of where we get that information from.
Well, thank you all for joining us live today. Lots of great questions. We hope our answers were helpful. It's always a little bit difficult when we get the questions that we're not prepared for to say exactly what we mean, and we'll probably think of something we should have said 5 minutes after we shut down here. But just remember that you can continue to send comments and questions pertaining to the 2022-23 waterfowl seasons and bag limits via email to waterfowlcomments@pa.gov, or you can mail them to the Game Commission headquarters until March 20th. We'll then take all that information into account as we select the seasons and look for those to be announced probably sometime in April. Thanks again.
Yeah,